Hi, everyone, and welcome into the Carnivore Renaissance podcast. Today, I have the immense joy of talking to Dr. Gary Fettke. He was one of the very first I could educate myself into nutrition more than 2 years ago. He has been a real and honest leading voice in the field of medical nutrition. Dr. Gary Fettke, welcome and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. We're looking forward to the chat.
So, as I said in this quick introduction, you're now a leading voice in the field of medical nutrition and more specifically into the ketogenic sphere. But at some point in time, some people didn't like what was coming out of your mouth. Could you explain to the audience the silencing attempt on your person that you had to face?
I think a lot of people still don't like what's coming out of my mouth. I actually quote Ronald Reagan at this point in time. I have, forget US politics, but at one point in time he said that he wasn't smart enough to lie. And there's a lot in that statement. So I've been known for speaking what I think is the truth to my patients for decades. And part of that was that I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've recently retired from clinical practice, but I haven't retired from what I call political practice. So we're still trying to do a lot of reform work in this whole field of metabolic health, nutritional guidance, and calling out the vested interests. But my journey as an orthopedic surgeon was that I was looking after most of the diabetic foot complications in northern Tasmania, which is an island off the bottom of Tasmania, off the bottom of Australia. And in the process of that, what was the occasional operation that you'd be doing on patients with diabetic foot complications 30, 35 years ago became the mainstream. And it was literally a tsunami, a proper pandemic of complications that were coming through my clinic. So I started looking at what needed to be done rather than just surgically operating on patients. I started looking at the metabolism, and it was actually hospital food that was the trigger, because I had someone in hospital, a young guy in his 40s, who were contemplating amputating both of his lower legs because of the infection complications. And I went in and saw him, and he's been eating ice cream in hospital. And that whole thing catalyzed a whole series of events, including my own pretty well now doctorate in nutrition, even though I've never been awarded a doctorate. I've spent that much time researching it. So effectively I said, would you stop feeding this guy sugar? And I was told, okay, that's the dietary guidelines, to give people ice cream in hospital as hospital food, even if you've got out of control diabetes. And they said, if you don't like that, you're going to have to change the guidelines. So I've spent the last 15 years working down that pathway, and we've actually achieved a lot just in the last 6 months. But effectively, I did research into the whole concept of diabetes, in particular, metabolic health, obesity. And the most important thing in anything is to go to the root cause. And as it turns out, the root cause of most of our metabolic health problems, most of our medical problems that we're actually confronted with, are actually based on what food we eat. And we've been paralyzed about traveling down the path of preventative health. Let's talk about lifestyle and talk about preventative health and talk about nutrition, but effectively medical education right across the board is about how to medicate someone out of this problem, how to operate out of the problem, rather than going back to the root cause, which is our food. And when you actually go into it, over 10 years ago now, I came up with this thing called the nutritional model of inflammation. Which is that sugar makes you hungry, refined carbohydrates will make you fat, and polyunsaturated oils will make you inflamed and sick. That is that perfect storm of sugar, too much refined carbohydrate, and the real kicker, which is inflammation, is related to the seed oils. Now, that was purely a hypothesis. I said, okay, this is what I think's going on. This is a mechanistic example of how we could explain modern disease. Interesting, when I started talking about sugar primarily, which was a couple of years before that, within a day, I was targeted when I went on this thing called social media, which is quite a foreign concept for surgeons, certainly 15 years ago. Within 48 hours, I was targeted by someone who worked for Coca-Cola. And then as time went on, as we were gaining traction with this message, I ended up getting targeted by the food industry, particularly the breakfast cereal industry here in Australia. We've got the internal documents stating that I'm to be targeted. And in that targeting, I was reported to the medical board on 3 occasions for giving nutritional advice, and specifically telling my patients to avoid sugar. And that's really what it came down to. And a lot of people say it can't possibly come down to that. But yes, that's exactly what I was targeted for getting my patients to avoid sugar. In the defense of that, over a long period of time, I was reported another further 2 occasions, each time by dietitians, each who were working with their parent body who had been being paid by the cereal industry to target me. And I had to defend that, but rather than actually just defend it to the medical board, we went on the front foot, continued my own education, looking down that whole pathway. And in the process, didn't just discover the science and uncover more of the science. And I think there's a whole body of proper science behind this concept now that too much sugar, too much carbohydrate, and particularly the seed oils are an inflammatory milieu, which is accounting for a larger problem of our metabolic health. And all I'm advocating for is reduce your sugar, your carbs, and your seed oils. And guess what? 90% of people who do that get 90% better. So in the process of defending the science, my wife, Belinda, did an enormous amount of work into the vested interests that were behind giving us, targeting me, but not only targeting me, but targeting all of society. And that in itself is a massive story, and we could go on for days with her work. But effectively, and you wouldn't be surprised, no one's really surprised by it, but all we're doing is we've named the names, we've named the actual culprits behind it. The big food industry, particularly the breakfast food cereal industry, the processed food industry, has been involved for over 100 years in giving us bad information, giving us bad nutritional advice, and ultimately we're paying the price as a society and we're getting fatter and sicker. It doesn't matter if it's here in Australia, it's in Europe, the same figures. It's literally obesity out of control, childhood metabolic health problems out of control, mental health out of control, diabetes, Alzheimer's, you name it, irritable bowel syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, across the entire spectrum. Our health systems are now sickness industries, and they're just completely succumbing. Now, I know I often rant and rave, but that's in a nutshell. The basic premise is we're arguing about eating real food and not eating ultra-processed food.
So, as a medical doctor and a surgeon at the time who was mainly following the processes that you learned, that you mentioned, you were cutting legs to people who had complications. You were probably at the time trying sincerely to help people. And when you discovered everything that you just said, what was your reaction or feelings?
Well, my first reaction
when you realized that you were...
I'm not stupid, but I'm clearly naive. I mean, I literally went, wow, we've got something here which literally can improve the outcomes of patients within days. So I had to prescribe to my patients in hospital. I had to write on the medication chart. I prescribed that they were given 2 eggs per day and cheese because it wasn't available in hospital food. And literally that small amount of extra protein into their diet started improving their wounds. In the process of all of that, we can turn around diabetes. You can literally, what we call officially therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. Reduce your carbohydrate intake dramatically, and you will see an improvement and arguably a complete remission of type 2 diabetes within days. So I was, in fact, with this information, I went, wow, this is fabulous. Why isn't it being shouted from the rooftops? Because it is empowering the patient. Most patients in the system are completely disempowered. But with this knowledge
Mhm.
and information, you are able to empower patients to take back control of their own health. You get them off medication, you get them to avoid surgery. Now, this doesn't fit into the money-making model of modern medicine. I was talking
But
patients out of having operations. I was trying to get them off medications, and we were successful. Those patients that wanted to do this, if you give them the right support and the right information, it's the most powerful tool in medicine that I've ever seen. And it avoided
so
surgery.
you speak about the role of the doctor, and I think this is very important and interesting. Sometimes I feel that most doctors are just in a way doing their jobs, meaning following whatever guidelines. And is it because they are lacking time to really educate themselves the way you did, or educating themselves and their patients? Or is it because they're really convinced that what they have been taught cannot be wrong at any point?
There's a lot to unpack in that question statement of yours. First of all, I think now if you're a doctor and you haven't heard of therapeutic carbohydrate reduction in the management of diabetes and you're not instituting that and supporting that with your patients, I think you're negligent now, right across the board. I mean, this is
Mhm.
not low carb in the management of diabetes is now in Australian national guidelines. It should be the first line of management before you put that person on another drug or an injection or whatever. It's literally, that is the first line. So I've done a couple of talks on this, one of them on YouTube, a few years old now. It's called The Failure of Medical Education, because
Mhm.
I don't think doctors are too busy to learn something new. That's what we're supposed to be doing all the time. The trick is, as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, is to admit that what you learnt in the past was completely and utterly wrong. You then have to apologise to your patients and society that you got it wrong, that you were duped by all this. And then you've got to be brave enough to go against the guidelines. Remembering that most medical education around the Western world is based on the premise of what I call read, repeat, reward. You read the
Mhm.
textbook, you repeat what's in the textbook, you repeat what you're given the lectures on, and you'll be rewarded. You'll pass the exam and you'll go forward and do that. And then you actually, okay, the excuse is I'm too busy to learn everything. I'm just going to follow the guidelines. Doesn't matter if it's guidelines for blood pressure, guidelines for heart disease, guidelines for mental health, guidelines for diabetes. But you've got to work out who writes the guidelines. First of all, if you're a busy medical doctor, you don't have time to actually get on guideline committees. And as
Mhm.
it turns out, virtually all guidelines across medicine have been written by people with vested interests, disclosed or undisclosed, with ties to the food and pharmaceutical industry or a religious ideology. And when you track through all of that and you uncover it, then you find out the guidelines are actually completely biased down one pathway. And to challenge the guidelines means you'll get into trouble with the medical world. That's all I was doing. Go, hang on, the guidelines say it's okay to give patients with out of control diabetes 3 ice creams per day and chocolate chip biscuits and muffins and cakes and biscuits another 2 or 3 times a day. Now, that is so much common sense. But I tell you, that's what the dietary guidelines are, and that's what the hospital food guidelines in Australia still are. When you piece them together, I've actually given lectures to the Australian hospital food industry, and they say, no, that's not right. So I just put up examples. Here it is. Your guidelines say this. There's nothing better than getting hold of someone's guidelines and putting them back underneath their nose and saying, you wrote this. You're now defend it because I'm in trouble for questioning it. What a journey! But which
Okay, so
rabbit hole
maybe
do you want
there's
to go down?
Maybe there's a third category I didn't mention in my question, but when you read these guidelines, it's difficult or hard to believe that whoever has some 6, 7, 8 years education in medicine uh, read these and think, oh, that's cool, that's okay. So I said maybe lacking time. I said maybe uh, believing in what they have been taught. But is there the third category of uh, being fearful of of like doing
Well,
what you did, basically?
the,
Because I think once you speak out, you become on the edge, like Tim Noakes, you
but
um, and
the very
others
first
have.
thing is to admit. I mean, you've gotten an email from me, and I stand by the statement: science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. It's
Mhm.
on the bottom of virtually every one of my emails. That is called evolution. That is the scientific method. Every single fact that you get given, you should challenge it. We live in a society of misinformation and media manipulation and censorship. So it's hard to actually work out what's right and what's wrong. But if it doesn't make sense, you should challenge it. But the trouble is, you've got an entire culture of medical professionals, and I'm not just talking about doctors. I'm talking about nurses. I'm talking about paramedics. I'm talking about dentists, chiropractors, who have been educated by the food and pharmaceutical industry, and it's really hard to challenge this entire belief system. And I don't. My teachers believe their teachers. Their teachers believe their teachers. And it all literally tracks back to over 100 years of the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry being completely inextricably linked up and manipulating our medical and nutritional guidelines. And that's where it's all there in history. And I'm quite happy to debate this topic with anyone because every single statement I make is backed up with historical references. The science is current. Excuse me. You mentioned I'm involved in this the ketogenic diet. There's a book called Ketogenics put
Mhm.
out by the Noakes
I
Foundation,
have it here.
and
Yeah.
that is completely up to date. I was involved in writing one of the chapters. Every single line that was written in there had to be completely and utterly backed up with current peer-reviewed scientific references, not beliefs or anything like that. And so, what we're talking about is actual science. And when someone says, "Oh, you're going against, we've got to have an ultra-processed food diet," it just doesn't make sense, and it's not based. The very first thing, if someone come along and said, all this food that we've introduced into the food cycle, and all the grains and cereals and processed foods and all the chemicals have got to play some role in our health outcomes in the last 50 years. And if you keep defending food pyramids or food guidelines, then I'm sorry, you're an idiot. And that's I'm now a cranky old man. I'm past the point of actually trying to be politically correct and polite all the time. I'm sorry if you don't understand basic biochemistry and you're a doctor. Go back to square one. Go back and look at biochemistry again, because that's all we're talking
But
about.
at the time, Dr. Fettke, did you get support from your peers in any form when you were targeted?
Very little locally. I can still remember talking about, most people have an awareness that sugar in excess is trouble. I started talking about that only 15 years ago, and everyone looked at me as I was from a different planet. And so my local community did not give me much, if any, support. And it wasn't until um, someone from Melbourne across what we call Bass Strait, across the ocean, rang me up and said, "Do you want to come along?" And that was Rod Taylor. And Rod, who started Low Carb Down Under and unbelievable amount of YouTube material there, 100 million views on all that. Rod invited me to speak at his house, and there were 4 of us that gave 15 to 20-minute presentations to a dozen people. And on that night, I felt that finally I wasn't alone, because I was definitely feeling alone. And look at this movement. We're having a chat now, but because we're, and the term tribe, you found your people who actually got an open mind, who are looking after their own health and have an interest in not only the health of themselves, but the health of the environment, the health of the people, the health of the world going forward. Now, I've almost described vegans in that, except for one difference. I think they've got a closed mind, not an open mind. Because because essentially, if we're talking about low carb, and your carnivore renaissance, if you're talking about low carb, ketogenics, ancestral diets, proper human diet, whichever way you want to call it that, then it has to be based on animal-based foods. You and I are animals. We're all animals. We have an animal metabolism. It's based around the Krebs cycle, and our metabolism is based around a requirement for a complete set of proteins, essential proteins. We need complete fats. We need micronutrients. We need minerals. We need vitamins. We do not need a single carbohydrate. So everyone says, you need carbs. You need 50% of your diet as carbohydrate. Well, there's not a single biochemical pathway that requires ingested carbohydrate. There's a lot, again, it's something to unpack. But the only way you can get a complete nutritional profile that suits our metabolic needs is if you have an animal-based diet or predominantly animal-based foods in that diet. That's it. I'm sorry, any other diet is going to require supplementation. Yeah. And so the vegans who are, and there's quite a few people who are in the low carb, keto, carnivore space who used to be vegans, and they've actually realized they got unwell. They've spoken at this. I'm talking about people lecturing in that space, who have actually gone on that journey of their own health, and then found that they got sicker, and it wasn't until they put animal-based foods back in their diet that actually improved again. I've actually got, if you've seen one of my talks, I talk about the evolution of diet, where I talk about that most people actually start off, I say, if you eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. Along the way, you're going to look like the food pyramid. Boom, we're just blowing out. And that most people most people end up getting sick doing that. And there's a group of people then decide to eat by the food guidelines and but they still remain sick. And then they move to low carb, healthy fat, LCHF, low carb, which is eating real food. We can talk about what that definition is. There's another group that go down the vegan pathway because they're trying to find health. They're trying to find well-being. They've got the right mindset about improving their health and the environment and whatever. But that whole mindset is actually propaganda that's come from the food industry and religious ideology. Over time, they will develop some nutritional depletion, and they'll move back to LCHF. There's a group of people who are doing low carb, healthy fat, who then decide to go more hardcore and then become keto. And there's a group of those that, for health reasons primarily or for other reasons, may in fact go full carnivore. So I'm pretty much carnivore when my wife's not here. She'll go. We don't mind a few vegetables in the diet because it creates a bit of variety. But I have a diet which is 90% carnivore, and I'm healthier for that.
But now people understand more what you went through as a doctor and why. I'd like to ask you more on a biochemical level why sugar is toxic and very bad for people.
I think it's
a simple question, but I think it's important.
But it's simple in one respect and it's difficult in another. Because people say, oh, look, there are people who live on the tropics who have a diet high in sugar. Yeah, but they can get away with that because of UV light and vitamin D synthesis to a degree. In COVID, I did some research to say, okay, we're talking about carbs being bad. I'm going to come back to sugar, but I'm saying carbs being bad. So I worked out roughly what the toxic dose is. And in my mind, I gave an academic argument that the toxic dose, dose that starts giving you a negative effect, is at 4 grams or 1 teaspoon of glucose, which is 1/5 of a slice of bread. Now, you can't talk about glucose without talking about fructose. So sugar is 1 molecule of glucose and 1 molecule of fructose. They're very similar in the number of atoms in it, but they have a slight twist in their chain, and they've got completely different metabolisms. In our current society, with obesity and pre-diabetes and diabetes out of control, about 30% of the glucose that we eat travels down polyol pathway and gets turned into fructose. So if we just look at fructose, it's a chemical which most people don't know much about. It's in very few of our textbooks, and it was only definitively described in 2010 by a Swiss fellow, Look Tappy. So, look, I'm sorry, they're sold out to Coca-Cola and the food industry, because the argument that's put forward by them is fructose by itself is not the cause of obesity. And he's right, but it is a cause of significant metabolic problems. And even he will admit it. And I've actually asked him that to his face in a meeting. So fructose is ingested. It's virtually all metabolized by the liver on the first pass up the portal vein and into the liver. A small proportion of it will go down forming glycogen. People have heard of glycogen. It's an energy base in muscle. Another pathway of fructose goes down an aldehyde pathway, which means it gets converted to alcohol. That's how we make wine. We get the fructose component of grapes and stomp them around and ferment them, and it gets turned into alcohol. Well, our liver will do that with the sugar. And if we have too much of that over a long period of time, it's going to cause liver damage. Another pathway is one of the byproducts of fructose is a thing called uric acid. A lot of people heard of uric acid because it's associated with gout, and it's demonized that if you have too much red meat or too much red wine in your diet, you're going to get gout. Well, fructose, too much sugar in your diet, is more likely to give you gout than meat. So there's been a reduction in meat and alcohol consumption across the Western world in the last 50 years, but there's been a doubling of gout. Well, hang on, that doesn't make sense if it's caused by meat and alcohol. In fact, it's fructose related. And if you take fructose out of the diet, you can actually see uric acid levels drop down. Uric acid is tied up with nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is, again, something which people have heard about or may have heard about. It has 3 critical pathways. One is it keeps our circulation going, particularly to our brain. It's maintaining our blood pressure, and it's also got an enormous effect on our immune system. When your uric acid level goes up from fructose, the uric acid will inhibit the production of nitric oxide. If you bring the uric acid down again, nitric oxide production goes up. That in itself, so literally people who give up sugar, their blood pressure comes down within days. Their immune function improves within days. So that's uric acid. There's that nitric oxide, critical to our circulation. I can come back to it when we talk about glucose. Another pathway is the production of fat, because the excess energy that's comes in has got to be turned around, and it gets turned into fat. And that fat is stored in the liver, and when it can't be kept there, then it gets turned into lipoproteins. Lipo, which is fat, protein, combined together, and that gets sent out into the system. in the process of that, the end product of that, once it's been distributed around the body, is a thing called a small, dense LDL, small, dense lipoprotein. As it turns out, when they get oxidized, which is the problem with inflammatory seed oils, it comes into that. That creates an inflammatory material which enters the blood vessels, the blood vessel walls, and then that is one of the major components in the cause of arterial disease, cardiovascular disease. This is the old sugar. This is the old fructose. Another pathway, and there's multiple pathways. Another one is that it tends to make us hungry. So it has an effect. Ghrelin is a stomach. People are aware that your tummy rumbles. It makes you feel hungry. That's a hormone called ghrelin. So when you're hungry and your energy requirements go up, your stomach will actually produce ghrelin. Fructose stimulates ghrelin production. There's another hormone called leptin, which is actually secreted from our fat. When we've got plenty of fat on board, the hormone leptin comes out of the circulation and tells us not to eat anymore. It's a satiety hormone. Fructose comes in and inhibits that pathway. Now, I'll summarize all of that with what happens in nature. So at the end of summer, beginning of autumn, the fruit on trees ripens. And animals will strip those trees bare in a night. Now, whatever your native tree is with fruit on it, in your environment, animals will strip that tree bare in a feeding frenzy so they can get fat for winter hibernation. And it's got it made, this whole fructose pathway, uric acid, and even a cortisol response in there is all tied up with our sustainability if we're animals in nature. So the fructose is making us hungry, which drives behavior so you can gorge yourself, or the animal can, and it gets stored as fat for winter hibernation. The trouble is, as an animal, and it should only happen for a few weeks of the year, but what we've done is we've exposed ourselves to fructose 365 days of the year, so we're constantly hungry. That's just the fructose metabolism. If we look at glucose metabolism, which is the other half of sugar, glucose, we know a lot more about glucose metabolism, but we've never actually thought about it as potentially being harmful. As I've said, 30% of it, if you're insulin resistant, you've got prediabetes or obesity, 30% of the glucose will flip down the pathway of fructose. I think that's part of the runaway train we've got in society at the moment. One of the things I've considered about glucose is everyone says, glucose is inherent for our health. We must have glucose. I actually have a flip. I actually think glucose is incredibly toxic above a tiny dose. And our body does everything in its capacity to get it out of the bloodstream like that. A very small amount of glucose that we require for our red blood cells, the lens of our eye, and some small cells in our kidneys can be created by a thing called gluconeogenesis. It can be from breaking down fat, small amount from protein. It requires so little in our diet. You've got to remember, if we needed glucose constantly, you couldn't fast for a day. You couldn't even sleep overnight without having a storage mechanism. Think about people who do fast for a month or have been going on starvation diets. They don't die within 24 hours or a week or anything. So they're not actually eating carbohydrate. And in nature and in evolution, we did not have access to carbohydrate 365 days of the year. The only natural sources of carbohydrate are fruit in season, honey if you want to break down a beehive, and that's about it. Unless you want to start refining it with cereals and grains and milling and stuff.
And fruit not everywhere on the planet.
Pardon?
There are fruits not everywhere in the planet.
No.
There are places that have very
the Inuit Eskimos have none.
Fruits.
And in fact, it's interesting. If you have an all-meat diet, if you have a very I'll come back to that uric acid pathway. That uric acid pathway and fructose metabolism is inhibited by vitamin C. So fruit actually comes with its own antidote in some respects. So you can eat fruit if it's got vitamin C in it, will actually inhibit the inhibition of nitric oxide. I know it's a bit of double take, but effectively vitamin C in fruit comes a little bit with an antidote for itself. But you actually don't need it. And so the explorers, the Inuits, the Eskimos, have no fruit in their diet. And there's a tiny, but as a result of not actually having carbohydrate in their diet, they actually don't need to eat a lot of vitamin C to actually overcome that. Quickly, and again, there's this talk of mine, Carbohydrate, the dose is the poison, is on YouTube, where I go through and put the pictures up with it. When glucose comes into the body, it comes from the stomach, up the intestine, into the liver. It doesn't get all absorbed right there and then. It gets sent out into the tissues. As glucose circulates through every single blood vessel, it actually damages the lining of the arteries. The biggest organ in the body is not the skin. The biggest organ in the body is a thing called the Glycocalyx, and it's actually the lining of every blood vessel. Very much alive, and it pushes the cells through the capillaries. They're like little white, cilia, villi, just pushing things along. They are under the effect of nitric oxide, that thing I talked about in circulation. Nitric oxide creates that situation. The glucose comes along and it damages that glycocalyx layer very quickly. It grows back quickly, but every time you eat carbohydrate, the glucose level goes up. It will damage the glycocalyx. And people with diabetes have approximately a 50% thinning of their glycocalyx layer. That's a bit like taking half the insulation off your house, creating holes in 50% of your walls. It literally creates inflammation and things in the bloodstream breaking through the wall because the glycocalyx has been damaged. That's just at a blood vessel level. The other level is that if your blood glucose goes up, that glucose can get into the tissues. And the analogy of that is called the Maillard reaction, which is a cooking term. Most people will be aware that if you put a piece of bread in the toaster, it will go brown. You go past a pastry shop, you see that brown complexion on the breads, the pastries, the buns, whatever. That's called the Maillard reaction. And what happens is, in cooking, the glucose combines with the protein under the effect of heat, and it causes the browning. It's a caramelization. So the same thing happens in diabetes. It's every time your blood glucose goes up, or if you've got pre-diabetes, your blood glucose goes up, a bit of that glucose gets into the tissue, and that under the effect of body heat, there's a glycation of the protein. The glucose combines with the protein. So every time someone's blood glucose goes up, even a little bit, you are slowly toasting your eyes, your brain, your kidneys, your heart, your tissues. And if you've ever seen someone with an end-stage diabetic leg, it looks toasted. It's lost its elasticity. It's actually rigid. It's got a fibrotic state to it, but it's just been toasted over a long period of time. That same process is occurring in the brain, the eyes, right across our organ systems. So that's just a direct effect of glucose. Another effect is that when you ingest glucose, as I said, the body wants to get it out of the bloodstream because it's dangerous. So a hormone called insulin is secreted by the pancreas, and that will actually push the glucose into the tissues and primarily store it as fat because it wants to get the glucose out of the bloodstream. Again, my theory is, why have we got all these mechanisms in place to push our glucose out of the bloodstream? We've only got one small mechanism called glucagon, which is the opposite of insulin, to keep our blood glucose up. but it only pushes it up a little bit. It doesn't do that. We've got all these methods to drag it down. We've got a method to keep it where we need to with gluconeogenesis, breakdown of glycerol in fat. But we've got all these mechanisms to get it out of the bloodstream. So insulin itself is an interesting hormone. A lot of people have heard about it. It's life-saving in type 1 diabetes in particular. But if you have too much of it, and if your body secretes too much of it, and you do it naturally because of your diet, then you end up with this thing called insulin resistance. Like your body gives up and just you produce more and more insulin. The problem with insulin, number one, is it's a fat storage hormone. You put patients with diabetes on insulin, they get fat because it's a fat storage hormone. Yes, it gets the blood glucose out of the way, but it stores the fat. But it's also it's the greatest promoter of cancer. The most powerful cancer-promoting hormone is insulin. And those people with diabetes have got higher rates of cancer. We've seen this explosion of cancer in society, and one of the causes of it, one of the relationships, is the increase in insulin. Another one, which hasn't been studied as much, but certainly has in orthopedics, which is my aspect, is it's an inflammatory hormone. And in particular, osteoarthritis goes up when insulin levels go up. And when you bring the insulin levels down, inflammation settles down. So insulin, I don't think, is a very nice hormone at all. Talked about it as being wonderful, but it's actually... And so I keep coming back to diabetes because that's the lowest hanging fruit, excuse the pun. But most of our management of diabetes for the last... for the last 100 years, I was just thinking when we brought insulin into the market when it came in, most of our management has been, I'll say, completely wrong. If you look at all of the drugs that have been made for the management of diabetes, they've all been made to do something to the carbohydrate that we eat. So if you eat too much glucose, then we've got to get rid of it. So you give people insulin, which pushes it into the tissue. You give them metformin, which pushes it into the tissue. You give them some varieties of drugs which will actually make the body produce more insulin, which pushes it into the tissues. You'll get some drugs which will actually make you pee it out, so pass it out in the urine, or it'll get bound in the bowel. All of those drugs are not needed, or much lower doses are not needed if you don't eat it in the first place. So there's not a human biochemical requirement to eat a single carbohydrate. Mm-hmm. Every drug we're using in the management of diabetes is to do something. Is to do something about the carbohydrate we eat. So if we don't eat it, we don't need the drugs. The only requirement for the drugs in diabetes that we see have driven by pharmaceutical profit, not by physiological requirement. And so we can literally, people who go low carb, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, carnivore, literally require a halving or a complete removal of the medications they use in their diabetes management. So therefore, if someone's got diabetes and they're on medication, I say don't do this by yourself. Do it under supervision because you're going to require less drugs. And the side effects of the drugs are people having hypos. Their blood glucose drops down too low.
Yeah.
So therefore, you've got to carefully come off them.
So as we are speaking about diabetes, I know that now Alzheimer is called type 3 diabetes. In Europe, not so much, but I guess in the US, we hear this term more. Do you think that, as you said, that diabetic patients has a higher rate of cancer, do they also appear to experience a higher rate of Alzheimer or early stage of Alzheimer?
It's all the one pathway. This is what I call about if you've got inflammation in every single blood vessel in every single corner of the body, then it's the same condition. And if you've got glycation of proteins in every organ of the body, it's the same condition. And so you've got to look at any statistic in any country on any condition. They're virtually all just going up. And I
Yeah.
think it's just the same process. That's why I'm very proud of the fact that I came up with this nutritional model of inflammation. There's no rocket science behind it. All I did was put the jigsaw pieces together. My stupidity was that I spoke out loud about it because it, we've all got family, friends, loved ones who have been caught up in some metabolic health problem. If you don't, I don't know which desert island you're on, but everyone I know you just got to is struggling with some health issue.
Yeah.
And the simple fact of the matter is, it is primarily lifestyle based. You can talk about genetics and epigenetics and all that sort of thing, but the primary problem I see is what fuel you put in the car. If you put the wrong fuel in the tank, you are going to have to go into the mechanic to have it fixed. Now you've got a choice, and
Yeah.
that's what we're doing at the moment with society. Is we're putting everyone's in the mechanic shop getting fixed, getting a medication, getting a drug, getting something or some whatever, when all they got to do is go back and actually stop putting the wrong fuel in the tank. But the trouble is, there's so much disinformation telling us the exact opposite of where that what we should be doing, because there's massive
So,
profits to be maintained.
and I feel that going back to the doctor implication in this process, I train people for 15 years, personal training, and I do massage therapy for about 10 years. And I more and more see people with inflammation issues. And that's why they do massage. They think this will fix my inflammation, lower back, knees. And when I ask them if they went to a doctor, what the doctor told them, most of the time, most doctors don't know. They say, oh, it's an idiopathic thing. We don't know the cause. It's a genetic. It might be genetic, or there's nothing to do. It's a degenerative process. And I see in the eyes of the patients or clients this kind of despair of there's nothing to do. And I ask them every time, did he ask you or she ask you about your diet? No, of course not.
No,
And,
there's no money. I
and
know it comes back. There's no money in preventative health. To actually discuss all of this with a patient takes time and effort,
yeah,
and you're not remunerated for it. I'd like to see a different model of medicine. I'd like to be paid to not operate on people.
mhm,
If I do not do a hip replacement on someone for 10 years, I'd like to get paid that amount for the operation. Wow, that would change the equation. Whereas I can get paid for a hip replacement, get paid very well to do a hip replacement today, and another one tomorrow, another one after that. Whereas I should be paid to not do the operation. I'm completely disincentivized, as is most of the medical profession. And because with more and more people getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and they present with, some people will have cardiac events, some people will have a kidney event or a mental health problem or whatever. It's the same condition. It's that inflammation of some body part of which their susceptibility for genetics or epigenetics or one reason or another is more likely to pop up in that area of the body. I know what the answer is. The answer is we should be addressing primary metabolic health and empowering the individual. So I can guarantee your clients that you started telling them about this, they become, I've seen this over and over and over. When people find out about this, A, they don't like it that they're being conned in the first place. B, they don't like it that their doctors and healthcare professionals didn't give them the advice. But most importantly, they get empowered to move forward. And I found this to be the thing that keeps me going. Is it's the most exciting thing that I've ever done in my life. And social media and
yeah.
reaching out through yourself and others, I reach more people every day through the internet than I would
So you think the
see
social
through
media
a
is
lifetime of medicine. Pardon?
I said that was one of my questions. I said, how do you look at the influence of social media in promoting this way of living, keto, carnivore, low carb? Do you feel that it helps to move the system that you kind of fought?
Well, I think, as I said, most of the time, most of the work we're doing now is in trying to change guidelines. I support people at a grassroots level, number one. Number two, support people like yourself trying to get a message out there to your community, and then hopefully they will take it to their community. And that's the third, another layer where we're trying to do is we're specifically working at a governmental level. Myself and others, trying a multi-pronged effect. So we've got a top-down approach to change. We've got a bottom-up approach to change. Because if we don't change, there is no hope. It's like the world economics at this point in time. We are financially ruined as an entire planet. We are health ruined in the same way. Whatever we're doing is completely unsustainable. So we can try and
Yeah.
wait for the system to change, but the person can change straight away. You can decide what you want to eat this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow. You don't have to wait for a government guideline to come along and tell you what to eat. Have you ever seen how many guidelines there are in the wild? A wild bird, it doesn't have dietary guidelines, does it? Ants on the
No,
ground
not
do
that I
not
know.
have dietary guidelines. We as a human race are the most stupid people, the stupid creatures that we've actually, decide to delegate to others what we should eat. And having told what the
Is
science
it?
is, when in fact it just, what is it? There's a term, only man is stupid enough to manufacture something that they then eat. And as
Yeah,
I say, if it's got a food label
but
on it, you
that
shouldn't.
that's every time I have people asking me a question about the risk, danger, or um, about the carnivore diet, I tell them, and that's very simple. I said, if I imagine a world where the technological improvements that we had over the last 1 century and a half, meaning, and that's not all over the world, by the way, it's in the Western world and also around the world, but a lot of places are not equipped sometimes with this kind of um, electricity, central heating, fridge, big wall, and stuff like that. I said, if all of that stops, and after 6 months, all the reserves that these kind of societies made are gone, what will happen? You will go and look for foods. Do you think you will find your eggplants? No. In Switzerland, if I look at Switzerland, do you think you'll find these kiwis? No. Do you think you'll find these intensive agricultural products? No. And I live here in the mountain. I don't think there is much to eat for me there. So the reality, and we go back to the reality, we will hunt, most probably animal and big animal, because you cannot feed an entire group of human beings with berries.
No,
I
they don't
don't see that
exist.
happening. And this is very logic. If you just say that, people, they look at the sky and they go, yeah, yeah, but yes, but okay, yes, but what? Just you are
I,
an animal. I said every animal has a niche, and nobody think of what is our niche. So,
I,
and I
I
had a
think
very interesting interview with Dr. Mickey Bendor. And I think the paleoanthropology is super, super, super interesting when it comes to understanding this long, long, long time evolution of ours.
our
But
it's. I think that you end up traveling a philosophical path when you actually look at your nutrition. For me, for us, we actually had to apologise to ourselves. We had to apologise to our children for saying, actually, we fed you guys the wrong thing. We're not having to apologise to our grandchildren because they've actually come through low carb, keto pregnancies, little nuggets. All I can say is that they don't have no fruit, but they have a very low carb upbringing. And they're doing fabulously. I mean, I'm just obviously a proud grandparent, but all I can say is I don't have direct knowledge of harm from what they're doing. And all I can say is, just have a nutritionally complete diet. There's nothing dangerous about that. Have a nutritionally complete diet. So, but if you want to find a nutritionally complete diet, it ends up being predominantly animal-based. I don't know if you're aware, I have been arrogant enough to write the dietary guidelines out for the world. But they're the same dietary guidelines for insects, and they are for rats and for mice and for birds and whatever. And the dietary guidelines, if you are a living creature, is eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your culture and environment, avoiding added sugar and processed food. That's it. I've described the evolutionary diet. I've described the way we got here on the planet. I've described what every single living creature should be eating. Fresh, local, seasonal, whole food. Based on your culture, and I realise animals may not have culture, but their environment is the rate-limiting step. Avoiding added sugar and processed food, avoiding all the industrial chemicals that have come with it. It's so basic and it's so simple, and it's such pure and clean fuel for our cars, for our bodies, that literally taking that backward step means you empower yourself and you disempower the medical establishment. And that's coming from a doctor saying, I think this is a good thing. Disempower the system which is broken.
Yeah. And being in the fitness field since 2008, I came to a point where now, being more educated into the nutrition aspect of things, and also thanks to your work and your wife's work, by unveiling the vested interest and the people who are behind the scene, I look at my field, fitness industry, as part of that scam, because the only motto that they've perpetrated over time is calories in, calories out. You can eat as much sugar as you want as long as you come and pay for your membership, pay a trainer like me, and you lose weight, because everything is about losing weight.
I think a lot of it's about losing weight. I actually like the term weight normalization.
Mhm.
You get a health improvement and a weight normalization because some people need to put on weight.
Yeah.
Not many, but and it also takes away, it's a weight loss, it's a diet, it's a thing about this. No, this is about a health management option, which along the way your weight will normalize. And you may not get back to whatever normal weight, but most people who do it generally get a significant improvement in their visceral fat, their waistline comes down, they get healthier, and their weight comes down. But the primary aim of all of this is to get healthy, not to get weight loss. That's what I keep pointing out.
Exactly.
Weight loss is the bonus. The
Yeah,
health
it's a
is the
consequence. That's
primary.
what I'm. But how do you
All
see the
right.
fitness in this? How do you look at the fitness industry in this?
I think fitness is critical. I've always, however, I've always sort of had the feeling that you should be training for life, not training for health. There's a subtle difference there. So, look, I'm in my 60s now, and I do some core work. I use an ab roller, which is cheap. You can do an enormous workout and you can do it quickly. So I'm time poor. I like hanging, like literally just hanging of a bar. You don't have to
Yeah.
do the chin-ups, just hanging stretches out a whole lot of the systems, good for the airways, gets a bit of air into a few areas, stretches out the spine. I do lots of walking exercise in the way of golf. I realise people may not think that's exercise, but in fact it is actually going out walking, getting vitamin D, sunlight, social interaction, a bit of stretching and swinging, and a few swear words along the way. And I'm also fortunate enough that I live on a farm. So if I'm not actually doing that, then I'm actually doing stuff. And I built fences recently, and that's a total body workout. Because for a day you're going up and down and squatting and carrying frames and pulling wires, and so I think so. If I want to do fitness work, I want to do fitness work which is for my hobbies, which is
Life.
walking, stretching, exercising, playing golf. So I also see that people going out and smashing themselves and causing damage on a day-to-day basis, I don't think is quite right either. There's so much work in this field, and to be fair, I'm confused. I do think the older you get, the more important it is to do resistance exercise. And that's from a mitochondrial function, it's from an autophagy, it's a mitophagy. It's actually really critical to do strength work. I think aerobic work and running and doing your half an hour a day of aerobic work has been over-exaggerated, the benefits of that. I think the concept that you can outrun a bad diet you just can't do that. So you see a lot of people out there exercising and eating crap food on the side. I can, and we play, and this is one of Belinda's terms, and we do it on so many different fronts. She calls it moral gymnastics. And exercise is one of those. I think exercise is really important. I think we should be outside, as I say, socializing, getting fresh air, getting in touch with nature, doing, getting muscles working, getting our lungs working. As to how much we need to do, I don't know. I'm confused. Do we need to do 5 minutes? Do we need to do half an hour? Do we need to do a total body intensive workout every 3 to 4 days like Ben Beccanecchio talks about? And I've tried all this stuff and I don't know the answer. So I know what I do for myself is that if I haven't done some moderate exercise, I will do some core work with an ab roller and hanging on a bar at the end of the day because I can slot that into my life easily. And if I don't actually do that exercise, I don't sleep as well. So
that it's an interesting because I think the confusion that you're talking about is I can relate that to what you said before, the guidelines. When you say, I don't know what's the best, we came to a point where my grandfather or his era or his generation, there were no fitness. You would actually work out because you would build a fence or you would work in a factory or, you would use your body, and 80% of the population would do that. And I think around the 80s, you had this massive urbanization where everybody's in a city, in an apartment, sitting all day in an office, in the car, subway, bus, etc. And then you see the rise of fitness. And now exercising, moving your body means doing it into a frame, and you have a job around it, which is called fitness training. And then everybody has his own vision, but I think it's like the ant or the bird.
I remember a horrible statistic that this is in the UK and we're back 25 years now, that 90% of women between the age of 18 and 25 walk less than 800 metres per week.
Wow.
Because they'd go from their place of work, home, they'd catch the bus would drop them off at work or the station or whatever, And they were, but it was some horrendous statistic. Even let's say it's 50% wrong. Yeah, but it's more. It's we're a sedentary society. We hop in the car and we go. And one of the criminal things about Australia and the United States, for instance, is supermarkets. I love actually going to Europe and into the cities, and you have to walk to go and get your cheese. You have to go and walk to a different shop to get your meat, and you can't carry it all. You can't put it in your big SUV vehicle. You've actually got to walk from A to B to C to D, and then get your fresh, local, seasonal whole food, take it home, prepare it. But the supermarkets, is all part of that problem that we have as a society. We are moving less. How much is the antidote to moving less? Well, the antidote is to move more, and that varies from person to person. As to how much, I don't know, but and that varies with age as well. I watch my grandchildren run around like spinning tops, and then they fall asleep at night. I like to think that I'm running around as a spinning top, and I fall asleep at night. One of the good things for sleep, however, is being honest. And I actually don't know how the vast majority of health professionals and people involved in dietary guidelines and medical guidelines actually sleep well at night. Honestly, don't know how they do. But I sleep well, so
That's
it's
good. At least you get your hormones
it's
right.
very hard. We're talking about nutrition and science, but I keep drifting down the path of philosophy because ultimately that's a lot of what it's about. There is a spirituality in getting back to the basics of how we evolved, and what we had. And sure, we used to. I found average height at the year 1000. So we're over 1,000 years ago now. The year 1000, all of the literature, all of the information we have from the year 1000 fits into one filing cabinet. But I read a book called 1000, but our average height wasn't at 1000 was not a lot different to what it is now, as far as the records go. But then we had the Middle Ages where our nutrition went down and our sanitation became poorer, and we became more industrialized and our heights went down. So, we've, as a society, as human beings, we've screwed it up. I often say that we've actually, we just happen to be the parasite most suited to the planet at this point in time. And I do have grave despair for the long term because we had a diet and a health and a good thing going. And the Industrial Revolution was good, and we've got all this culture as a result of it. But our last 50 years, we're definitely on a downhill trajectory. And the first way out of that is take control of our own health. Sort out your own spot first. Sort out what you're doing in your own house, and then go forth from that.
But that's what I said
travelled
at the
down the
beginning.
path of philosophy. Sorry, Clement, I can't help myself.
No. That's I think the central aspect of it, because I said at the beginning when I introduced you, the real and honest leading voice, and I use the word honest because I think that there are risks when you speak out of those things. You can lose your job, you can lose money, but that's the truth, and then your ethics pushes you to stick on that path and take the heat, like you experienced that Professor Tim Knox did as well, and others. But that's not everybody. I recently myself lost a quite good contract with a big company because I started to advise ketogenic and low carb or carnivore nutrition to the employees. And even though we have done with a friend almost 2,000 sessions on a period of time of 272 days, so not even a year in terms of days. The well-being manager decided to remove me and to replace me with another contractor, provider, just on the basis of people complaining of me not doing a massage but talking about nutrition. And obviously, I had to make a choice to say, am I following what I think is the truth, or am I going to lose the contract? So I ended up losing the contract, but that's
I
fine
get it.
because I can sleep. I can sleep easily at night.
I don't know if you have children.
No, no.
Our son just this weekend sent me the words of a song because he knows I'm tone deaf. I can never remember, and it was pretty well what we're talking about is about following the path less travelled, but actually getting rewards in different ways. And I actually
Yeah.
went, hang on. So ultimately, life is not about money. Life is about what mark you leave on the planet. And if your children actually think that mum and dad did the right thing, it doesn't matter what. It's not about wealth and whatever, but if mum and dad did the right thing and mum and dad are good people, wow, what a great legacy. And that's all. I
Mhm.
mean, that's our aim. Just do the right thing, and it saddens me to look out at the world and see that the right thing's not being done or it's being obstructed. And I know that sounds higher than mighty making a comment like that, but just, can we all just do the right thing and be honest? Be honest to yourselves, be honest to your patients, be honest to your community. And the honesty is don't challenge guidelines. And it's okay. I was in a meeting this morning and we were talking about the fact that the people who are in that meeting and who are challenging guidelines here in Australia, most of us are at the end of our careers.
Mhm.
And it's our leadership positions now that we should be standing up and saying, okay, and I get it when you're in your 20s and the 30s and you're starting your career, and it's harder to question the authorities. But as I say to the 20 and 30-year-olds who are coming up through the system, okay, you might be afraid of challenging the system now, but don't ever stop questioning it.
Yeah.
And that's the philosophy going through. And then when you get to my age and you get into my position, then you must take over the baton and I'll give it to you. You must keep challenging the system because, as I say, science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. I mean, that's it. And the moment we stop challenging, the moment we stop following, then that's the end of society. And that's the thing which gives me despair. So if I'm going to lie awake at night, it'll be worried about that. But I'm surrounded by enough
But
people, including yourself, who are taking the baton, moving forward, asking the questions, supporting others in your local community.
I feel that there are a lot more younger generation of doctors. If you look at Anthony Chaffee and other ones that are now, because of social media, because you guys with Professor Tim Knox and Sean Baker have done a risky job of
Well,
doing what you did,
yeah.
now feel entitled to speak more openly and provide this information as well.
Well, every one of those names that you've spoken of, I've helped them, or we've each helped each other within the legal cases against us. But the thing is, we're actually all innocent. All we're doing is going against the corporate interests. But we've actually, we've all been able to defend our positions and have all the accusations thrown out. But it means now that particularly Tim and myself, and I'm not banging on, we're not, but with the public cases that Tim Noakes had in South Africa and I had here in Australia, where the entire topic was put under scrutiny. And it now means healthcare professionals right around our countries, but particularly even the wider world. And I've supported other doctors in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Indonesia, Nepal, India, who have all come under scrutiny from their authorities, they've all gotten off because the back of this has been broken. Cannot argue with the science that's now been presented and in support of ketogenic diets for those people who require it with poor metabolic health, and they should be supported. And I think I'm very proud to be part of that movement. And and even I don't know when this will go to air, but I listened to Robert Kennedy's speech as he said he was going to step down from the direct, and his talk, the last half of it, was all about metabolic health and all about processed food and getting rid of the damn processed food industry out of our children's mouths in particular. And I went, and the people who are advising him, I know. And it's not mainstream, but it's going to get there because this is good for the people.
And now it's coming into the American election. It's a topic that is.
It's a topic, and it will get. Mainstream media will throw it down because mainstream media get their funding from the food and pharmaceutical industry for advertising. I mean, I can cite so many examples of that directly for myself and directly for others. This topic is not good for mainstream media's profits. And so therefore you can virtually every time you find someone banging on about bad side effects of low carb or keto or carnivore, literally with a very simple scrape of the surface, you find out that they're being supported by vested interests in the processed food industry. And it's or a belief system which is driven by religious ideology. It's just literally but most people don't question what they hear. They say, there's a problem with this diet, won't do it, it's dangerous. When it's just been propaganda which has been flapping around for 100 years that you have to question. Oh, it's exciting times.
Well, yeah, I think so too. And I don't want to take too much of your time. So I'd like to thank you for the interview. And I also want to personally thank you for, I think, I would talk for myself, but I'm sure many people would embrace what I'm saying, giving us the strength to fight for something that is just, in a sense. I don't know if you say in English just, but
it's
fair in a way. Because honestly, I have to tell you, I was so not interested into nutrition for a long, long time. Because to me, as a trainer, I was young. You just go and train and you lose weight. Why are you talking about diet? So to the point where I had to face an increase of, I gained fat and I couldn't lose it through the usual thing, calories in, calories out. So then that's when I stepped into you, Paul Mason, and other doctors. And I had no social media, right? Now here I am doing a YouTube channel about nutrition. So I went to everything. I was trying to stay away, but that's because of people like you. And I want to personally thank you because
you're welcome. But I am part of your journey. You're part of mine. I mean, we all gain strength. As I say, that meeting that we had in Rod Taylor's lounge room, that gave me strength to keep going. Because I found other people who said, actually, you're probably right at that time, not you're wrong and you're crazy. And again, the craziness is that we've kept at it, but then it's not crazy when you're doing the right thing. That damn Hippocratic oath, you're supposed to do the right thing. Every religious text on the planet says, do the right thing. It doesn't make you, even if you're not religious, do the right thing. And it's a pretty easy mantra to live by. Putting it into action might be a bit difficult, but nonetheless, that's the path we decided to do.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, on that good note, thank you very much. And I wish you a great day, Dr. Fettke. How do
Thank you
people
very
can
much.
find you? And
I,
if they want
I
to...
think most of my talks and Belinda's talks are on YouTube. I think that's
Uh-huh.
we pop up on podcasts all the time because passing the baton on. I'm on Twitter. Our Facebook presence, our web presence, we're doing. My website is well and truly out of date. I just don't have enough time to get on there and redo it. Called nofructose.com. But you find our lectures on YouTube, and I think actually I like YouTube because the lectures I put up have got lots of pictures on them, the diagrams where people can actually understand. That picture when I talked about fructose getting turned into alcohol. I've got a picture of a liver, but I've got sugar coming in here, and I've got a glass of red wine coming out there. It's visually easy to understand. And in fact, I got criticised by the medical board by making things easy to understand for patients. That was a WTF moment. I said, "What? That's supposed to be my job." And I know a lot of our story seems too unreal, but this is actually really what happened. It's quite, and defending the turf meant it's been set, an example for others, and that's good. But thanks for your time, and you have a good day, and I'm going to have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And all the best to you. And
Thank you.
thank you to the audience. And if you think that everything we said today can benefit anyone around you, please share the video. And thanks for your support. Okay,
Okay. See you,
bye-bye.
mate.